Ah, okay. Become aware.
Camera shy. She
Hmm?
doesn't want to be in the YouTube video.
No,
Mm.
she's camera shy.
Yeah, you haven't trained her yet.
I haven't media trained her now.
No. Speaking of training, good.
Yeah.
Um, shall we talk a bit about publishing? How to or become skilled at publishing? Because as they say, publish or perish in academia. It's the name of the game. Um, so it's a quite important thing to start thinking about for academics, even early on as PhDs. How early on do you think that you started thinking about publishing and that it became an important uh, thing for you to start concentrating on? Or yeah.
I mean, like I was thinking about it before starting. Um, I wrote my last thesis, my master's thesis, with the idea of publishing it separately as an article. And I did. So I don't think there's too early a time to start thinking about it. I think if you are, there's definitely like right and wrong ways to go about it, I guess. But there's no time that's like too early. It's really like if you can do it earlier, then there's no way that that's gonna. I don't see any way that it's gonna harm you,
Mm.
to start doing it early on. In quite the opposite. In at least some cases, they will look for things like that when they're when you're doing applications to stuff and to positions. So it can mean quite a lot if you have, even if it's just something you've submitted somewhere or like a conference thing that you've presented somehow. um, that can make the difference in some cases, at least, as to whether you get the position or someone else does.
Yeah.
So but you probably know that already if you're watching this. If you're interested in this line of work, then this is probably on your mind already, I would say.
But we actually touched about on this on our previous episode as well when we were talking about our supervisors, different advice that we got. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think so this came up that should you start thinking about publishing early on and put focus on that, or should you start with sort of doing courses and then let the papers come or grow and then start publishing towards perhaps the second half, or once you have some more knowledge or some courses? Because I feel like most of the PhDs have that I know, that I'm friends with, that I work with, have chosen that path. And even you mentioned that you got that advice from your supervisor. I think my supervisor was unique, giving me the opposite advice. But yeah, so
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I'd say that your supervisor gave you the right advice, which is to start writing early. But
Yeah.
there's also the sort of nuancing aspect here. Like, you and I are in the same country where it is a requirement to have this or that many points and this or that many courses
Yeah.
to get your degree. I think in countries like Australia, there's actually no like mandate on doing courses, I think.
Okay.
So things like this does like vary quite a bit.
Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
and I think it's Australia that's particular. I'm not sure what it looks like, everywhere, but there's some like, yeah, there's some kind of like nuance that we can put in there.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
But
but
then
yeah,
some people think about they write a book, for example, or like a monograph rather than a compilation of articles. So
yeah,
there's some probably different
for
thoughts
for
there as
for
well.
for their dissertation, I mean,
Yes,
specifically.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you agree with your supervisor on what's best to do there, or do you look at what's best for your future, or do you have any thoughts on that? If do you think,
Mm,
because it feels like for me it was obvious that I was going to do a compilation um, rather than a monograph, even though a lot of people have said that it's pretty prestigious to have a monograph and to write a monograph. Um,
I mean, I guess so. So if you don't know, a monograph is basically a book that summarizes the stuff that you've been doing, whereas a compilation is you write a shorter text that kind of introduces several articles, and then the rest of the rest of the dissertation is just literally reprintings of those articles, usually between 3 and 5.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, prestigious. I mean, I guess so. There's like, if you go back, then you did monographs, right? That's what you did. But that sort of came way before the academic journal. Prestigious today, I don't know. Like, no one reads PhD dissertations anyway. So I don't know how much like I actually talked to my supervisor about this last week. And what he said is it takes a lot longer to write a monograph. If you have any plans of turning it into a book, then you should do it.
Oh, right. So
otherwise, there is no reason to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe if for yourself you just want to write a book.
You just wanted, yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, you're right, because how I found that it's kind of helpful to do articles is because if you want to go to any conference, you would presumably need to present something, and then perhaps there's a proceeding or something like that. And that's a great way of networking, getting to know other people that are also going to that conference, for example. And I don't know how you would do that. I mean, maybe you would do book chapters, but they're not original, maybe individually. So it's not like a paper where you have one individual idea for each paper.
I don't think there's
works.
one way of doing that. I think
Maybe, yeah,
it's a
maybe
lot more at your discretion. I mean, I know that at my university, almost no one does monographs, and part of that is because it's an engineering college, so that culture just doesn't exist. Like, you're in a philosophy department, so of course you have more of that sort of traditional connection in that sense.
Yeah.
I'd say a few percent at my college actually does monographs, but my supervisor is one of them, and the way he structured it was every chapter in the monograph refers specifically to like these publications. So it starts out with this, like, here's a list of stuff I've done in the last 10 years or whatever.
Yeah.
These are involved in that chapter, these are covered in that chapter, these are and so on. So yeah, I mean, it's not like you definitely shouldn't see it as you're giving away the chance to do articles because you're doing a monograph, because that's not the case. And there are some fields where it is very common to write a monograph, and where people often do not have that many publications. But it's not a written rule that, like, oh, if you do this, then you can't do that. Like, usually the monograph is based on stuff that you've been doing, in which you can publish elsewhere, right?
That's true. You're right there. Yeah. But that's the thing. I don't think I would only do the book, without having some intention to at least publish along the way, because I think, I mean, one thing that I think probably we've established, that it's good to start early on, to start thinking about it as early as possible, publishing. The sooner you have something published, the more I feel like you're in it. You feel like you're in the game, because if you too long, it becomes maybe more stressful to start thinking about it because, to be honest, I've waited over a year now, just even from my paper getting accepted to it actually coming out published. So it does take, and I was warned about that. I had another paper, it was in review for 2 years. So it's like kind of ridiculous how long sometimes you have to wait for these things. And if you wait for the last year to start sending in papers, you might get a little bit surprised how tedious the process is sometimes,
In based on my experience, you have been unlucky with that. I've well, actually, I guess you and I have a paper together that's been in review for quite a long time that we don't know where it's at. So
exactly, that's a year and a half.
Is it?
Or
no, can't be that long.
At least a year.
Yeah, maybe
it's a year.
Yeah, but we had to like switch the journal at one point, and I don't remember the timeline at all, but but point is, like, in my and to be fair, I've also published a couple of very short articles, which are obviously quite quite faster to have reviewed.
Mm.
And it's also easier to find people who are willing to review something that's 1,000 words compared to say 6,000 words. Like it's just less time commitment.
Yeah.
But even like I've published a couple of things that are significantly longer, and I didn't have to wait that long for reviews. So there's definitely an element of luck in there. Like 2 years is obviously like that's quite ridiculous. Like
Yeah,
and
that one was ridiculous. I'll never send to that
yeah.
journal again, to be honest. But I also think maybe it depends on the field. I heard that in physics, the average is about 3 months, and
Yeah.
that's pretty. I don't think that's the case in philosophy all the time. But
No. Well, it's a very, very reading intensive field, philosophy. Like I imagine it takes a lot of time to go through a paper in that sense. Whereas if this is pure prejudice on my part, of course, but
yeah,
so some fields are a lot more methodology focused, where like that's sort of like, you know, what did you do and how, doesn't necessarily involve sort of like reading line by line in the introduction. And
yeah,
yeah, I'd imagine it takes quite a long time. Like, and I remember that I've proofread a couple of your things, and like it takes time to work through a text like that. So maybe there's an aspect of that as well. So like, what field are you actually in, and that probably plays a part in like how long you have to wait. But there's also, like you said, there's like, is it the journal that's doing it? Is it, you can also just get unlucky with the people who
yeah.
say yes and then don't do the thing, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's true. So there's a lot of factors, but I think what we both totally agree on is to start as soon as possible is advisable. At least to think about it and getting in the hang of how publishing works, right? It would be great to get experience in the process as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And it's like that those first like one or two papers do make a lot of difference for how you approach it moving forward.
Yes.
Like there's definitely a coming unstuck that
Yeah.
you feel once you've done it once.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree.
because it's very much like, you know, before you do it, you think about it a lot, but you really don't like. It's hard to navigate the first time, but you pick it up very quickly, and after that, it really becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh,
So how would you say what kind of
so,
habits
so
or
getting that first one makes a difference.
yeah, exactly. But
Hmm?
so do you have any concrete advice on like habits you have for publishing, or how do you get the hang of academic writing? Because it is unique, right? It's not any other essay, I say. I think it's a bit different. And you can't
I
just sit
guess
down and wait for
so.
creativity, right? You have to kind of establish habits.
Mm, yeah. I mean, what do? You're much more diligent than I am when it comes to
Oh
stuff
no.
like that.
No, I
Yeah,
don't
but
think I
but
am. I
like but yeah, but you actually do have at least periods where like you're very consistent about working. Whereas I'm very uh if I were being kind, I'd say I'm more of like an artist. You know, I kind of like I sit down and then for 2 days I'll do nothing but write, and then it will go like a month and I won't do anything.
really.
At least that's the way I feel. No, that's not true. I'll
Well,
do like
that's
a
not
lot of
true. I
notes,
feel
but
like you work all the time. You're writing constantly.
yeah, but it's not a lot of time what I'm doing is like taking notes. Um
Okay.
but actually like doing concrete writing, when I actually like do that churning, that's a
Mm,
very intense and a very short period of time at a time.
mm.
Like I've told I shouldn't say this a lot, but one of my papers I wrote in 4 days, and
I remember.
and that's it, you know. That's not. But then I didn't write anything for several several weeks. And yeah, I'm not a good person to ask for my habits because
No.
I barely have any.
See,
Uh,
I feel this is something that's kind of interesting because I took a course in academic writing. Was it?
mm,
Yeah, academic writing, I think it was called, that the university offered, kind of a workshop or course. It was just one day. So I thought I'll do it. Why not? I might get some advice or some idea, tips or tricks. And you know, the number one thing that I feel like many people say when it comes to this kind of thing is just write every day, you know, just write something every day.
Yeah.
I find that very difficult. I do. The good advice that I did take from that course, though, because the habit, I feel kind of a bit like you know, it come and goes. Like some intense periods when there's a lot of different things, like teaching, or you know, I'm doing YouTube videos or something, and it is a lot of things. I feel like it's hard to sit down and concentrate and get into that writing flow. But one thing that I did get from that course, that when you actually want to write, just start writing, you know, start with the skeleton of the text and, you know, don't worry so much about getting every phrase or every wording right. You can always go back and revise it. As long as you have some material to work with, create that
Yeah.
material, create that stuff that you can later on be critical towards and, you know, edit. You can edit it later, you know. I think
Yeah.
that was quite good advice, to not block yourself already from the first sentence, but just have a
Mhm.
flow and then go back and edit afterwards. What do you think? How do you work with your text?
Yeah, that's true. I'm realizing now when I'm listening to you that I do have some things that I do pretty consistently, even if the writing itself isn't. I definitely do begin by sort of putting up headlines a little bit.
Yeah, it's
Or
structure.
like yeah, so like, yeah, there should be something about this and there should be something about that, and then the text kind of tells me what I need to change as I'm working on it. One thing that I find very useful, you are right about like, you know, edit after the fact, sort of. It's a bit of like Ernest Hemingway almost, like you write drunk and you edit sober. um but
That's good. I like that.
yeah, I think it's Hemingway.
Sounds like it was something.
Yeah.
A few
um
daiquiris.
One thing that I do is when I do have like a lot of text, but it's not fully polished, I will tell my I'll use the text to speech command on my program, so
Yeah.
the program reads the text back to me.
Ah.
And that is extremely good for listening to the flow of a sentence.
Oh.
It also helps you pick out things that you miss when you read it. Like, it's very easy for when you're writing to miss words that you fill in automatically. You know, words like the and un, or, you know, tiny filler words, that you kind of fill in when you're reading. Um, that will become very clear when it's reading, because it will make this like weird little cutoff in the speaking,
Yeah.
or in the reading. And I'll do that. Like, I have a text that's getting close to being finished, and I've listened to that all the way through several times. And that's how you know it's done, is when it, you know, you can listen to the whole thing all the way through, and you don't pick up on anything that, like, that sounds weird. You know, at that point you pause it and you go, okay, we'll flip these words around, and then you listen again and go, okay, that's good. There,
Oh, that's
that
actually
works.
awesome advice. I haven't thought about doing it like that, because sometimes I feel the same, that when you've read it too many times, I sort of get blind. But
Yeah.
when I hear you talk about it, listening to it and like going through it and changing the words so it sounds right, it reminds me about something that my supervisor said. He said it over and over, that it's like a craftsmanship. You have to work on it. You know, you have to like go back and polish and be like super thorough, and you know, it takes patience and skill. Or actually, yeah, like it's something you have to learn, a skill that you have to learn and acquire to get better at. And I think you get better and better, and then in the end maybe it just flows a bit easier.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You mentioned academic writing
Yeah.
before.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if this constitutes advice, but I know that I spent a lot of time, because when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a writer. Like, I
Mm.
wanted to write novels and stuff, and I did. I wrote two novels when I was 17 and 19, I think.
Cool.
Um, and the way I learned to write for myself was to read a lot of books and to try and copy the style.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'd like go for writers that had very particular ways of writing, and they would influence me very, like, concretely, and I would sort of like that would sort of make its way into the way I try to write things, and then I'd sort of try that out, and then by the time I moved on to the next writer, I tried to do some of that, because it wasn't really like in the sense of emulation so much as it was just what I thought was cool at the time. But sort of looking back, I've realized that it has made me quite flexible when it comes to like figuring out very quickly what style is appropriate. Um, so that kind of thing definitely helps. You know, if you have done writing, and I did some like newspaper stuff in college as well, which was another sort of practice of getting the tone of something right. And so really any kind of like genre appropriate writing that you have done or can do, I think is good exercise. Because that sort of trains you to you know, any kind of genre will have its own sort of melody. And it's just the same as like with music, you know, once you've heard it enough, it will sort of tell you when it sounds right, if you have enough experience. At least that's the way it sort of presents itself to me.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, quite
Mm.
beautiful. I think, yeah, you're right. I think when writing becomes enjoyable, I mean, when you've reached that stage that your ideas can become enjoyable to express through writing,
Yeah.
quite satisfying. But it's something that I think it's when you see people kind of like you that are really good at it and fluent, you know, when you see a pianist, right, playing and it just looks so easy, but you forget how much
Oh,
training is
come on.
behind it. But that training is necessary. So like people shouldn't think that it just came for free, right? But it's definitely something that
No,
you,
that's fair. That's fair enough.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it is. And we shouldn't forget that because at least for us, you know, especially with how much text we're supposed to write, I don't feel like we really got that training in our courses. It was a lot of, you know, getting in the knowledge and having creative ideas we might have had, but actually the academic writing has come only at this level, really. I mean,
That's
competing
yeah, that's true.
yeah.
There's a big discrepancy in how courses are actually taught. I was always disappointed that I didn't get to write more papers
Yeah.
because I felt like that was how I, you know, could actually exhibit stuff that I knew. And
Yes.
instead, I had to sit in a big hall and just go, what is it called when the neurons do this? And it's like, ugh,
Yeah.
2 points,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Exactly.
And
Yeah. I kind of felt like
it yeah.
sorry, I interrupted you. Oh, were you?
No, nothing. But like, how do you approach the writing um, from your end?
Mm, it's much more the texts that I've been writing lately are much more um technical. You know, I go through them with my supervisor and he's sort of constantly telling me to make it boring, make the text more boring because I tend to write a bit more colorful, if you will. um
Yeah,
Enjoyed that with my essays and stuff, right? That's how I used to do it, but I totally see the point in at least learning to do it the way he's advising me right now, to, you know, take away all the fluff sort of thing and just get to the point, get, you know, be precise and express the words conservatively, you know, express myself conservatively but exact. And that's a really
yeah,
cool skill, I think, to learn and to be able to do. And then I think as time goes on, then you can start to be more, you know, add your own personality to it, or flow. There's some of the best
yeah,
writers I know, or philosophers. I mean, one that I'm reading right now is called Alvin Goldman, one of the best in epistemology. And the way he writes is so fluent. It's like he's talking to you, but it's never excessive. It's never like fluffy or it's always exact. You know, he has this way of expressing himself and using the right words, finding the right words to describe things simple, but yet in a very enlightened way. So I think that's
yeah.
something that I would like to work on and to get better on, or at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? What else do we have? Do we have any other advice or any other um, things or thoughts about publishing that we haven't mentioned yet? What should you do if you're stuck? Say
Um,
you're stuck. You've written and you're stuck. You don't have the flow anymore. Do you go for a walk, or do you just put it? Oh, like, yeah. Do you put a timer for yourself, or what's some kind of concrete?
Mm, um, yeah, I mean, I don't get that feeling much anymore, but if I get restless, I'll go for a walk. And that helps sort ideas out, I find.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's sort of banal in a way, but the best thing you can do for your text is to write it. You know, it's there's no substitute for actually doing the work. If the problem you're having is on a more conceptual level, I guess, if it's like I can't figure out how to make these two things make sense, and that kind of thing does happen, especially early on. Then, yeah, I'll go for a walk to sort of figure that kind of thing out. Um, but as for writing, if it's about ideas, then doing other things than writing may help. But if you know what the ideas are and the problem is the writing, then the only thing that's going to help is doing more writing.
That's awesome. That's a good
At
thing.
least that's the sort
Yeah,
of,
that's really smart
yeah.
way of putting it. I should mention one more thing there that I don't want to forget. That when I sometimes feel like even starting to write can be a hurdle to get over, because I constantly think, oh, I should read more about this. I need to know more about this before I can write. And there is always more to read, right? I think that's a really difficult thing to know when you've done enough reading, when you know enough and just write. And I think, like you said just now, when you start writing, that's when you realize that, oh, this part probably I need to read more about, or, the text will tell you what it needs if you start writing it.
Yeah.
So I think once you just kind of know what you want to write, when you have the idea, then you need to start, then the writing has to do the guiding of what it needs. The text will tell you what it needs, basically. I think that was a great slogan. to
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very Field of Dreams in a way. It's very like build it and they will come, and then like
Yeah. Yeah,
if
but
you if you start writing, the text will tell you what it needs.
yeah.
it's it sounds like it's from some vaguely inspirational movie made in the 90s.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, it actually answers our next kind of bullet point that I wanted to mention as well. Like, how do you know which journal to send it to? Or do you write with a specific journal in mind? And I think we could answer
Yeah.
kind of the same slogan, because you kind of know when you have the text where it fits, or like what kind of
Sometimes it depends. It's definitely the case for like longer articles or like reviews, because they're more kind of boilerplate, right? It's a lot more like they kind of have the same format. And in that case, it really is just like, okay, where can I send this that makes sense, you know? But I've done this a couple of times where I have an idea, and it's not like an idea for a full article. It's a like shorter thing. I'd like to write something about this, and then I kind of like scour a few journals and see which one of them have which ones have good formats for doing something like that. Like a lot of journals in some of my fields will have things like short communications for like small findings, or like if you want to write a comment, or if you want to write a brief thing on something that's smaller than an actual article, or if you want to comment exist as findings that exist, or say that like, hey, we need to think about this thing because this is important and not recognized. um then it's a little bit more like, where who will actually take something like what I'm thinking about.
yeah.
But of course, those texts are also not the kind of labor intensive ones that I think you have in mind. Like when you write like the research articles that are 6,000 to 8,000 words, and they'll take a good few weeks, a lot of time to put together. And
But I think
yeah.
You're an important thing here that we totally should mention, because I'm guilty of that. I think that I locked myself into, I have to write these substantial pieces, and you said, hey,
Yeah, you are guilty of
yeah,
that.
I am, but you've enlightened me on that point. You've sort of pointed it out to me that, hey, you can actually write smaller pieces and have, just a smaller text and still make a good point and still publish something. And that's the important thing. You can find different things to publish. You don't have to get stuck in this one format of what you can publish or what sort of things you should publish. And I think that's super good. And especially
Yeah,
with, or when something is tedious, you can have this other text that might be your little darling, like little fun text or something that you can mix it up, definitely, and find different places to publish. And then it makes sense to look at the journal and the kind of, like, I know in philosophy we have this review reply pages or what is it called? In journals, there's like dedicated reply sections. And those can be really fun to write sometimes and are much less tedious or labor intense. Yeah.
Yeah. It varies a lot between the fields, I guess, but it's knowing. I don't know. You pointed this out, that I seem to have a good eye for things like, I'll be looking around and something like, oh, there's something here. Here's some, you can write something in this thing. This is an interesting little hole that you could fill with this thing that I was thinking about. And I don't know what I would call that exactly, but it's a little, I guess it's a little bit instinctual. Like you can definitely learn to recognize good opportunities for, like, and I also, I don't want to stress that, like, oh, you should publish just for the sake of publishing, because that's the wrong way to think about it. Um but learning to recognize where there's an idea. It doesn't mean that you should just churn stuff out for the sake of doing it. It should still be like worthwhile, and should still try and contribute meaningful things. But you also shouldn't get locked into thinking that everything has to be this one labor intensive kind of thing. There's many different ways to do useful contributions, I think, and learning to recognize like those opportunities is a very good way to also get your name out there. My most famous whatever text is famous because I basically said that a paper that was published by more famous people than I am was doing things wrong. And that article was later issued with an expression of concern from the journal 6 days after my article was published. And that one took me, I think, 4 days to write, because it's only 1,000 words. I like talked to a senior colleague, and he told me like, yeah, I know you're onto something. You need to do this and this, and this looks suspicious. You're right about that. And
pretty cool.
It's but like, compared to like some of my longer stuff that took me like months to put together, it's definitely the case that there's more than one way to make an impact. I guess it's the sort of takeaway there.
Yeah, that's to wrap up on, I think, because I think you and I can talk all night about our experiences, and we need to keep some for next episode. So perhaps next time we could,
that's another good lesson. Don't put all of your good stuff in one article. You want to chop it up.
Spread it out. That's that's a good. I love that we got that in too, because that's so true. Make sure to mention it. And so maybe next time we're going to talk about, should we talk about maybe teaching as a PhD or teaching experiences? What's next?
We can do that. There's some good and some not so good stuff to say about that, I'm sure.
Same here.
Yeah.
We've got something to say about that. Super awesome. Nice talking to you, Axel. See you soon.
Yeah.
Out.